Hi everybody, welcome to today's conversation. Today I wanted to drop the biology and the neuroscience part of healing. I wanted to focus a little bit more on the psychological aspect. As much as the neuroscience is super interesting, especially right now, we also can't forget the other half of this is psychological. Let's talk about trauma, let's talk about resilience, and let's talk about authenticity. Before I get started, we need to define what is trauma exactly. Trauma is not so much the event that happens, it's more so how you experience the event. Trauma can look differently for different people. There's the obvious trauma, which I think most people get affected by, such as abuse, any kind of abuse, loss, grievance and disaster, poverty, inequality, all the obvious more life-threatening aspects of it. But there's also a kind of trauma that happens to those who on the surface seem like their life is going really well. Maybe they have both parents, maybe they have a family and they are doing well in life, but that doesn't mean that they didn't experience any kind of trauma. Perhaps growing up, the parents were emotionally absent, or perhaps there was bullying at school or loneliness. What I'm trying to say by giving all these examples is that trauma is subjective. Different people will have different reactions to different events in life. Everyone has a different tolerance level and resilience level. Not everyone will have the same effects. That's why you see some people are comfortable public speaking, others feel terrified. Some people enjoy driving, others are very anxious. It's because our nervous systems react differently to different situations. Some people have higher thresholds and some people are on higher alert, kicking much faster into a fight or flight response. So anyway, my point is trauma looks differently for each person. We can't say that, oh, you didn't experience this, so there's no way you have trauma. Personally think that everybody has experienced some form of trauma. And trauma is, I want to say 99% to keep it accurate, but really, I mean 100% behind all mental health issues and possibly behind a lot of physical health issues too. This is something that science hasn't yet looked into and confirmed, but I think we're on our way. Immunopsychiatry, as you guys know, if you've been following me, connects very much the mind and the body. I'm going to give a little bit of science, but just a little bit. The science shows that when you experience trauma, especially during developmental period, so, like childhood, your brain actually doesn't develop then the same way it would if you hadn't experienced any trauma. A recent study came out in 2025 that showed that the brain of children who had experienced trauma had similar brain activity and characteristics as soldiers with PTSD, soldiers who had experienced devastating experiences. For a lack of better word. And again, this is something that we knew, but the science is just now catching up. And we can see that the brain of a person who had experienced trauma does not develop the same way. Certain areas will be bigger than they should be, others will be smaller than they should be, all of which have an effect on cognition, on mood, on behavior and personality, on health too, as we looked at with inflammation. Inflammation in turn also changes the physiology of your brain. We can't ignore trauma. We can't say, toughen it up, you'll be fine. Just carry on. It's there. It's scannable. If I took an MRI of your brain, I would be able to know if you've experienced trauma. So that was my little sciencey bit for a moment. Let's talk about the psychology of trauma. Let's talk about what it means to be an adult who has experienced difficult childhood and how that affects you in your everyday life, whether it's something you're aware of or not. Perhaps as you listen to this, you might recognize some aspects that you didn't consider were related to trauma, or perhaps it might confirm something that you already suspected. How does trauma manifest as an adult? Whether that would be in your relationships at work or in the relationship you have with yourself. Common theme for people who experience trauma is you get this tendency, this feeling that you're always a few steps behind. No matter how much you're trying, how much you feel successful, and no matter how much you work at seeming normal, you always feel a little bit behind. Everyone always seems to be ahead of you, especially when you have mental health difficulties as a result of the trauma you've experienced. There can be perhaps a certain grief that comes with seeing the rest of the world experience life normally while you have to deal with the consequences of the things that someone that should have cared for you didn't do or inflicted on you. A lot of emotions related to grief can arise from that. There are multiple things we can unpack with what I just said. Let's start with the fact that we often think, everybody else is normal while we're trying to stay afloat and seem normal. But this is a trauma response. There is no such thing as normal. What is normal? Everybody has some kind of issues they're working through. Some people are better at hiding it than others. Some people are more resilient than others. Some people have better coping strategies than others. Some people use productivity as a coping strategy. But what we often, when you think that a person is normal and you're not, your brain is actually putting that person on a pedestal that is higher than it needs to be. Because the reality is we're all equal. We're all human, we're all the same. Nobody's better than another person. No matter what your study level is, no matter what your job is, no matter where you live or how much you have in your account, we're all humans. Invalidate the feeling of being stuck behind, because the reality is if you did experience trauma growing up, then you 100 did not have the same start as everybody else. Everybody else got to focus on their studies, on making friends, on making mistakes and experiencing life, falling in love, being creative, discovering their identity, who they are, what they like, what they don't like. They got to go to concert, decide what kind of music they enjoy. They got to go to parties, so on and so forth. But your focus was entirely on how to survive. That survival instinct that you would have developed at home, perhaps, if that's where the trauma came from, it doesn't stop once you leave the house. It doesn't compartmentalize to only when you're dealing with the person that is inflicting the trauma. Your brain does not make the difference. Your brain then registers the world as unsafe and teaches you to spend the rest of your days and time scanning for who is trustworthy and who isn't, who is going to hurt us and who isn't. But unfortunately, it's mostly going to believe that everybody is going to hurt you potentially. And then the brain starts to look for confirmation. It looks for confirmation in people's voices, in their body language, in their tone, in the amount they talk to you or don't talk to you, in their presence or absence. The brain scans for these confirmations and adds them to your list of worldview, which would have been a negative one. When you've experienced trauma, you don't see the world as a safe place where you can go out and be safe to be yourself and express yourself completely, authentically. When you've experienced trauma, you see the world as, if you've ever watched The Walking Dead, I think it's a pretty good representation of how someone who's experienced trauma experiences the world. It's almost like living in a post-apocalyptic world where everything is a threat. If that was your experience of the world, how can you possibly compare yourself to someone who had a loving, caring family and who got to focus on their studies, who got to focus on their identity, who got to develop a secure attachment? You definitely then did not have the same start. You definitely were held back by focusing on surviving. There was something else I wanted to touch up on very quickly. Sometimes see in my comments, there'll be one comment, two comments per video like this that says, but how do I fix it? Like how, okay, great, you told me how I feel, etc., but how do I fix it? I wish there was a simple answer that I can give everybody and say, this is how you fix your trauma, this is how you fix your nervous system. Everybody can do this and everybody will be fixed. Wouldn't that be amazing? But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Therapy is the only way to really address trauma and how to fix it, because every single person's nervous system is unique. Every single person will develop different traits, personalities, coping skills, authentic self that is unique to them, and therefore what will work for one person will not work for another. Additionally to that, everyone will have a different pace to which they feel comfortable going. Especially within somatic therapy, where we take the nervous system through what it's been trying to avoid, we can't make everyone go as fast or as slow as everyone else, because some nervous system will very much feel uncomfortable and fight back and resist against feeling. Others will expand their boundaries a little bit faster. Not everybody works the same way. When you've experienced trauma like this, you will have very likely disassociated from your body's feelings, from what we call interoception, from any sensations that come from within your body. One simple way you can tell this, and I read this in The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. I think it's in the opening chapter where he says he's a psychiatrist, or is he a psychiatrist or psychotherapist? I can't remember. But he helps countless people. You know, he's studied for years and he specializes in things like trauma and addiction. But there is one question that whenever he gets asked this question, even by his closest person, you know, his wife, his mind always goes blank. And the question is, how are you feeling? And his answer is always, yeah, good. Yeah, good. I'm okay. Just very surface level answers, never quite being able to drop into your body and to your sensations and say, you know, I'm feeling whatever feeling is on the feeling wheel. I remember for me the first time seeing the feeling wheel, which I will, by the way, I will attach it in the description so you can have a look at it. The first time seeing the feeling wheel is when I realized that, oh my God, I have no idea how I feel. Like, how do I pick something from this wheel? Think about when you get asked, how are you feeling? How quickly do you try to avoid answering that? How hard is it for you to give a genuine answer that is not just good, bad, you know, sad, angry, happy? You know, can you, how in detail can you go about how you are feeling right now? And that will give you an inclination about dissociation. Of course, there's deeper layers we can go to with regards to being dissociated. Perhaps you have an avoidant attachment style, or perhaps you've developed coping skills to avoid feelings such as consumption of food, alcohol, anything that supports not feeling. Whatever distraction you've developed that takes you away from sitting with your feelings. It can be anything for anybody. It could be as simple as watching TV, scrolling on your phone, not being able to be alone, or being able to be alone but not with your mind, not with your thoughts. I feel like I could make an entire video on dissociation alone, and I think I should and I will. The obvious listed symptoms associated with dissociation are very vague, and I think it's much more complex than a list of symptoms on the DSM-5. I find that also people who've experienced a lot of trauma tend to prefer isolation over community. There's a lot of overlapping symptoms with people who've experienced trauma, people who have PTSD or CPTSD, complex trauma, and autism. Actually, the symptoms are incredibly similar, even for things like social anxiety. It's easy to tell why someone who has experienced trauma would choose isolation when you understand the worldview you develop as a survivor, because being around people requires performance. It requires a performance that you've developed in order to keep yourself safe, because your brain pictures everybody that you meet as a threat. As such, it has developed coping strategies to make you feel safe, and sometimes that can involve managing other people's emotions. So you become hypervigilant to other people's mood and emotions, and you try to keep everyone in a steady, safe emotional state. So to avoid angering people, disappointing people, to avoid any negative reactions towards you, you learn to manage theirs. I think that's one of the traits that is an indication as to someone who has not learned to develop their own identity. I mean, how can you be your most authentic self if you spent your entire life managing everyone else's emotions? Because that means that you experience the world through everyone else's emotions. That means that you've put your needs, your wants, your boundaries aside and just put the focus instead outwardly towards everyone else, towards making the world a safer place for you to exist. And for you to exist does not mean your true self, it just means safe enough. And that is, I think, one of the a really good definition to what it means to be in survival mode, what it means to be in a hypervigilant state, in a fight or flight state. And of course, this is more so a fawn state than a fight or flight state. This is a people-pleasing behavior. This is how we bend over backwards, we make ourselves smaller, we become incredibly agreeable just to keep the peace. Essentially, we abandon ourselves. Sometimes this happens without our conscious awareness. Sometimes this happens from such an early age and for so long that the person might not even realize that they've lost their identity. And how do you even begin to reconnect to your true self if you were never ever taught to, or if you were never ever allowed to even consider who that might be? So anyway, I've created a short program course with all this in mind with regards to how to find your authentic self. I wanted to make a course that is specifically oriented for people who have experienced trauma from a very, very young age. The term authenticity, authentic self is getting thrown around quite a bit around, social media and the mental health community. But authenticity means different things for different people. With regards to those of us who have experienced childhood trauma, authenticity is not just about being yourself. It's about finding yourself. Finding yourself because you've never even had the chance to find out who that is. You never had the freedom to express who that person was. So where do you begin? So I've created this program with all this in mind. It's self-paced, so you can do this by yourself. You can do this along with therapy. It can be an introductory sort of informational knowledge about what it means to be your true self when you never got a chance to find out who that was. I will leave the course in the description below. I hope you check it out. And if you do, I would love to hear what you think. If this resonated with you, I know that this was a very niche kind of conversation, but I remember the first time I started to ask myself these questions, like, who am I and what do I like? I remember trying to make a list of things and staring at this blank page for so long because every answer that came to mind, I quickly realized were answers that I thought I should say. They were answers that I had practiced to say, like, what's your favorite movie? What 3 celebrities would you like to invite for dinner? Or what's your favorite music genre? I always answered those questions based on what I thought would be an acceptable answer so that I didn't feel rejected from whatever situation I was in. And unfortunately, that extended to much further than just my music and my movie tastes. As I started to uncover this, I also started to realize that the answers weren't just in my mind. The answers were very much so in my body. Before they came up to my mind, my body had reactions to events, moments, situations where it either felt excitement and joy, or it felt, the opposite and made me want to run away, which relate to the feelings of, fight or flight and anxiety. When I started to listen to my body is when I started to reconnect to myself. I think I'll stop here for today. If you've made it this this far, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Let me know in the comments what you thought about anything that I've shared today. If you related to anything I've shared today, I'd love to hear that too. And I'll see you in the next video.